Good morning everybody and welcome to Handheld Nab, which as you can probably tell is on the opposite side of the M6 from where I live in Shap. And I've come up here this morning because you get beautiful views across to the far eastern fells. And up here there are these 5 kind of limestone cairns, which I think make for a reasonably interesting subject for a photograph. Now, as lovely as these cairns are, that's not actually what I'm really here to photograph this morning. As you can probably tell from my rather wonderful lockdown haircut, this is being filmed during lockdown for the coronavirus crisis. A couple of days ago, the UK announced that it was going to start easing the restrictions in place for lockdown, and so I'm finally able to get out of my office and start filming. But throughout lockdown, what I've been doing is I've been coming out into my local area and trying to reconnect with the area around the village where I live, because normally I would go and shoot inside the Lake District National Park, but because of the lockdown restrictions I can't get there. So I'm using my camera to reconnect with the area around my village, which fortunately, as you can see, is pretty beautiful in itself. And one of the things that has encouraged me to do is to explore some slightly newer locations, and we're going to look at one of those today. If you come up to Handheld Nab, you'll find this fantastic limestone escarpment. And from up here you get fantastic views of the limestone works at Shap. And Shap's quite well known for limestone. There's limestone all around this area. And I didn't really know this escarpment was here, so I'm going to spend a little bit of time exploring it with my camera. And that's going to give me a great opportunity to talk about the subject of the video, which is camera settings for hand-holding mirrorless cameras. Now, normally with my photography, I go into the Lake District National Park and I'm photographing the lakes and mountains in a very traditional landscapey kind of way. I've got a big DSLR, I stick it on a great big tripod, and I'm using filters. But since lockdown started, I've actually been limiting my photography to when I've been out exercising, and I've been taking my camera with me and shooting handheld. Now, a lot of people have been saying that I've obviously been watching a lot of James Pops's videos, but I have absolutely no idea what's given them that impression. The limestone escarpment runs north to south, and that means that you've got a side on it that's west facing, and it's got a load of boulders, and then you've got a side of it that's east facing, which has got these kind of sheer cliffs. Now, because we're shooting in the morning, it's the eastern side, the cliff side, that's got light on it, and that's the side that we're going to focus on this morning. First off, I want to talk a little bit about the camera that I've been using. It's a little Canon M50, and these are fantastic little cameras. But normally I wouldn't use it for stills, I would use it for filming my YouTube videos. But during lockdown I've been out shooting with this, mostly because of its size, because it fits nicely into my backpack. But another reason is that it is a mirrorless camera. And one of the things that I've been doing exclusively during lockdown is shooting in black and white. And I don't see very well in black and white. I'm trying to train my eye to see compositions that work well in black and white. And one of the things that you can do with this camera, with all mirrorless cameras, and probably my favorite setting, is you can set the picture style. So I can set this to black and white, to monochrome. And that means I haven't got to kind of visualize what an image looks like in black and white. I can see exactly what the scene looks like in black and white by looking through the EVF. And so that's probably my favorite setting. And today I'm going to be shooting with the picture style of monochrome. The next setting that I want to talk about is Aperture. Now, there is a saying that the best settings for landscape photography is f8 and be there, and that essentially means don't worry about settings, just get your ass onto location. But I'm going to take that to the extreme, and today I'm just going to be shooting at f8, and that's a really good middle ground between lens sharpness and depth of field. Now I know that if I'm shooting at 15mm, which is the widest for this lens, as long as I'm not focusing closer to the camera than 2 meters, and here I'm focusing what, 9-10 meters away, as long as I'm no closer to the camera than 2 meters, I'm going to be sharp from 1 meter to infinity. With the aperture set, that means that the next setting that I need to consider is the shutter speed. And one of the great things about shooting with a little mirrorless camera like this with an EVF is that essentially what you're looking at is a little computer screen. And that allows me to see the difference that it makes when I change some of the settings, like the shutter speed. And so that's allowing me to shoot in manual exposure mode. And I control the shutter speed by spinning this little wheel here that sits around the shutter button. And so because I've got this EVF, I can also have my histogram up, and that allows me to see how much light areas I've got and how many dark areas I've got. Now if I was shooting with a DSLR and I was just looking through the lens, it would be much harder for me to shoot in manual mode, because I wouldn't be able to see the difference that changing the settings was having on the exposure. And so what I would probably do there is shoot in aperture priority and use exposure compensation. And you would take a shot and then you look at the back of the screen and you see what the exposure looks like, and then you make some changes to the exposure and retake the shot. But because I can see exactly what impact changing the shutter speed is having on the exposure in real time in the EVF, that allows me to shoot in manual mode. Of course, aperture and shutter speed are just two of the settings that you need to control in order to slightly correct your exposure. The other one is your ISO. And today, because it's lovely and bright, I'm shooting at ISO 100. And I will only start to increase that when I can no longer get a shutter speed of at least 1/50th of a second. You see, this lens goes from 15mm to 45mm, and at that longer end I need a shutter speed of at least 1/50th of a second in order to get sharp shots handheld. The only other real settings that we need to worry about are autofocus. Now, when I'm shooting with my DSLR, I would normally shoot in manual focus because it's on a tripod, but because I'm shooting handheld, I'm relying on autofocus. Now, fortunately, this camera has far more autofocus points than my DSLR. But that said, I'm still only using the center autofocus point. Now, I'm not using back button focusing, and the reason for that is that this camera is really quite small and I've got really quite large hands, and it's very fiddly and difficult for me to get to the button for back button focusing. But because I'm shooting in manual mode, what that allows me to do is to frame up my shot and set my shutter speed, and then change my composition so that I'm focusing in the right place, and then go back and take the shot. And so to focus, what I'm doing is I'm just holding down, I'm just pointing in one direction, getting the focus right by half pressing the shutter button, and then I'm recomposing my shot and going ahead and taking the shot. And that works far better for me with this setup because I'm in manual exposure mode than using the back button focusing, because my hands are quite big and it's quite fiddly. It's getting quite breezy up here on Handheld Nab now, and that's probably a sign it's time for me to start thinking about heading home. But before I go, there's just one little bonus setting that I want to talk to you about, and that's aspect ratio. Now, I typically shoot for 2 aspect ratios. 4:5 for Instagram, so it's got classic 10:8 portrait orientation, and 16:9 for everything else. So that's my website, YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. And one of the great things about these little mirrorless cameras is you can set the aspect ratio that you see when you're looking through the viewfinder. And even better for me, because normally that would be hidden away in a menu, but I have a manual function button here, and I can set that to whatever I like. And I've set that to aspect ratio. So when I'm shooting in landscape orientation, I have that set to 16:9, and then when I want to shoot in portrait orientation, I hit that button, spin it through to 4:3, because there isn't a 5:4 setting for this camera. It's close enough, and away I go there in portrait orientation. And that means that I can make sure that my composition fits the platform that the shot is intended for. So there you go, those are the settings that I use when I shoot handheld with a mirrorless camera. And if you can't remember them, I have created a little infographic that you can download from my website and put on your phone. So you've got something that you can check when you're out in the field. And I'll leave a link to that in the description below. But from me, for now, it's bye-bye, and hopefully I'll see you next time.